Hello, Soundies. Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 20th of August, 2023. It's great to have you here. I hope you're having a great day. For those on the West Coast, Southern California in particular, I hope you're staying dry and or not too flooded. All right, let's go ahead and jump on over to our agenda for today. Today, Sony was kind enough to send over a UWP-D wireless microphone system for me to test out. This will just be our initial look. I'll have a full review that goes up on my main channel in a few weeks. Actually, probably next week if everything works out well. I think it will. But today we're going to take an initial look, kind of talk about some of its features. We'll give you a chance to hear it, that's where we'll start. So let's go ahead and go to the overhead camera here, and let me just show you what we've got. And I just remembered I did not start the camera. Apologies there. Okay. So here we have, there's actually a couple of kits here. So these three right here, the receiver and the two transmitters, make up the D27 kit. So this is the URXP41D receiver. It's a dual channel receiver. And then each of these are the transmitters over here, the body pack transmitters. These are the UTX-B40s. Sony has the most amazing product naming convention out there. It's really hard to keep track of, but I think it makes sense at some level. And then over here, we have a plug-on transmitter. It's currently connected, or the microphone I have connected here is a Sennheiser MKH 50 on the plug-on transmitter. And so that's the main idea there. Let me just kind of do a physical run through here. Here is the transmitter, the front. It actually has power switches for each of the channels. So each channel is switched on. So if you just are going to be using one channel, you only have to turn one on. Obviously much better on the batteries. We have a mic input on the receiver itself. So if you wanted to put another mic on here, maybe have the camera operator on a mic, and then have someone else on a body pack or even on a wireless plug-on transmitter there, you could do that. You have separate outputs for 1 and 2, so you can keep the channels completely separated. And then, of course, you have a headphone jack here on the top as well. You have 2 antennas. They are adjustable. You can reposition them in a variety of ways to kind of optimize your position of the antennae. And the thing that's important to remember is that I didn't learn this until fairly recently, but typically you want them in the same plane like this, which is why when you put this on top of your camera, you'll generally have them standing up or rotated a little bit off to the sides like that. So that as the person wearing them on the body, on their body, if it happens to turn a little bit to the side there, that'll work pretty nicely there. The battery is actually a separate pack here. If I push in on both sides here, we pull the battery pack off. This holds 2 AA batteries, and of course you can use lithium, alkaline, or nickel metal hydride rechargeables. So these are rechargeable lithiums that I'm working with at the moment. And then this slides right on here, just like that. Same thing with the body pack. Slides off. AA batteries are inside right there. You can just slide them back on, and it snaps into place. All right. Before we go too much farther, what I would like to do is I'd actually like to take a look at some of the specifications, or kind of talk about the system at a high level, and then we'll come back to actually working with these in real life. So here we have, this is actually the brochure for the UWP-D series. So this is a digital wireless microphone system. It's in their professional line. This particular kit that we're looking at today is really made for people that are...
Sorry, I'm still not sure about that.
Siri evidently made an appearance here. I have no idea where she came from and why in the world that's even a thing. Go away, Siri. That's a little creepy, honestly. Okay. Again, in regards to the Sony, so there are a bunch of different kits depending on what you need. So if you just need a single channel kit, there's the 21. If you need a handheld mic, they didn't send that over, but they also do have a handheld mic. They have a kit with a body pack transmitter and a plug-on transmitter. They have a kit with 2 body pack transmitters. They also have this little device here, which allows you to mount the receiver on a Sony camera that has a MI shoe, a multi-interface shoe. And so what that does in practical terms is you no longer have to run a cable from the receiver into the camera. it all goes through the shoe. And what's more is that it doesn't have to convert it back to analog. It sends it to the digital audio straight into the camera. So it doesn't have to go back and convert it to analog and then the camera convert it back to digital again. So that's a really nice feature for those that are working with the Sony cameras that can that do have the multi-interface shoe. Of course, you can buy the receiver independently, and there is also, for their higher end, mostly for their electronic news gathering cameras, they also have this slot-in receiver, which is a 2-channel receiver that slots directly into the camera. So it's essentially integrated into the body of the camera. That's mostly for the higher end for news and things of that nature. It is doing 24-bit digital processing. And the reason that's important here is that a lot of times with typically with analog wireless microphone systems, they do something called companding. Let's go ahead and go back to the main camera here for just a moment. The idea with companding is, in essence, to transmit the signal, they have to first compress it, and then once it gets to the receiver, they expand it. That's what compand is. It's basically a combination of compress and expand. And what that does in practical terms, it's not generally too much of a problem for dialogue audio, but for things like musical instruments, especially drums is a great example. If you have a snare drum, for example, when you hit a snare drum, if you look at the waveform for that, there's a massive spike at the beginning, and it has a distinct cracking sound to it. If you do that on an analog system that has a compander, you lose some of the punch of that. And so a digital system, as one example, generally can produce better audio than an analog wireless system that uses companding. So that's one thing that they do. And what's also interesting is that it's converting your audio at the transmitter pack to digital. That takes time. And the question is always, how much time, how much latency does it introduce? In the case of this system, it introduces less than a millisecond. It's very, very fast. So latency is not an issue here with this system like it is on some of the older first-generation digital systems. So, for example, if you think back to the Sennheiser AVX, that's a 19 milliseconds latency. The Deity Connect system, also a digital wireless system, was also a 19 millisecond latency. A lot of the newer ones are probably closer to 5 or 6 milliseconds, and then this one, in the pro end, they've been sub millisecond for a while. But now here on the kind of I would call this a prosumer level wireless system. They're at less than 1 millisecond, which is fantastic. Okay, back to the Mac here. Another thing that this system does in some cases is true diversity. And just to give you a sense for what true diversity is, it makes your connection a little bit more reliable. Here's a definition, a very simple definition. I found this over at Sweetwater, and I can just quickly read this. A wireless microphone term, speaking of true diversity, a more advanced form of diversity receiver. A true diversity system contains a radio receiver that actually has 2 independent receiver sections, each with its own antenna, rather than a single receiver with 1 or 2 antennas to pick up the transmission from a wireless microphone. The antennas are placed apart on the unit, and by a means of a comparison circuit, the unit constantly pulls the 2 receivers to select the one with the strongest signal. The result is an exceptionally stable signal, since the appearance of a dropout in both antennas at the same time, or both receivers at the same time, is not likely under normal circumstances. So let me just qualify that. If we go back here, the Sony UWP-D system, when you're using the URX-P410D, the receiver that we have here, it's a dual channel system. If you're using just one transmitter, then it's true diversity. So it actually has 2 antennae, and it has a receiver for each of the antennas. And so what it can do is it can actually switch back and forth between those. When you use 2 transmitters, then it is just an antenna diversity system. So at that point, it only has 2 receivers, so it has to use 1 receiver for each one. And what it does at that point is it's just checking which antenna has a stronger signal and using that one. So that's the distinction at a very, very high level between antenna diversity or spatial diversity and what is often called true diversity, which it's not my favorite term because it's just a different way of approaching things. I think generally you do want, if you can, it's nicer to have true diversity, as they're calling it here. So in any case, that's what the system does here. All right. We haven't tested it yet. It does have an auto gain mode. I'm skeptical, but we'll give that a try in our final review to see how well that works. Auto gain has traditionally not been the most amazing thing in the world. Let's see here. Channel memory, it can remember which frequencies you use. So if you have different, when you use different transmitters with your kit, in any case, it makes that just a little easier to set it up. Power, all of the units are powered by AA batteries. And let me just scroll down here. Apologies for the motion, but I wanted to get down to the specifications here to show you a couple things. It does come with an included mic. However, in the kit they sent me Sanken COS 11D microphones instead of the traditional Sony that comes with the kit, which is nice. I mean, the nice thing about a Sanken COS 11D is it's a known quantity. At least for me, I've used it enough that I know what it sounds like, so that'll allow me to evaluate the system, but I won't be able to test, unfortunately, what the bundled Sony mic sounds like. In any case, you buy the packs for the specific frequency range you need to use. So depending on which country you're in, you optimize for your country, and then typically you buy the packs within that range somewhere, where what's legal to use in your country. So it's not like for example, if we look at the Theos system, one of the actually I better go to the US version here, since the nice thing about the Deity system is that it uses what they call global one-band technology. So it spans from 550 all the way up to 960 megahertz. So whereas on the Sony system and on the Sennheiser EWP-D system, which we reviewed a few months ago, that's not the case. You buy them, they kind of split it up into smaller bands. So you buy one and it only covers a portion of the overall bandwidth there. So one thing to keep in mind. That's where the Theos, again, which hasn't been released yet, so we still don't know how it performs, but at least spec-wise, that's a little bit different there. In terms of powering time, we'll test this as well, but they're saying you get approximately 8 hours in the transmitter for the batteries if you are transmitting at 30 milliwatts, which is a pretty standard setting. And then you can get up to 10 hours if you drop that down to 10 milliwatts. Again, if you're working in fairly close proximity and you're not having any problem keeping the signal, you can drop to that lower power and save. And it depends on which version you buy. They have different versions for different regions. So I think J is the Japanese version, where there's some more, where the limits on how strong a power transmission you can do, they limit that at the actual transmitter itself. So wireless is an interesting thing. There's so many nuances depending on where you're operating it. Okay, let's go back to the overhead camera and let me show you just how, for example, the scanning and setting things up goes. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on the receiver first. And as I mentioned before, you have these switches, so we're going to use both channels. So I'm going to go ahead and turn both of those on. And it powers right up very quickly. What I'm going to do then is go ahead and power, actually before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and get a scan started here. So I'm going to just press and hold this button right here. And that's going and it's scanning right now. While it's scanning, I'm going to go ahead and turn on the body pack transmitter, and let's turn on the plug-on transmitter as well. So it's going to go ahead and do that. And as soon as it's done, it's going to have me hold transmitter 1 up next to it to tell it to set the frequency on transmitter 1. So it's telling me to do that now. So I just hold this up like this. I don't know if you heard that, but it gave me a little buzzing. And then it will tell me to hold number 2 up. Here's number 2. Hey, there it is. So it's sort of a haptic thing, haptic buzzing there. And now those are all set up. And you can see, in fact, with the lavalier microphone, we're getting level on both of those. Okay. So that is that. Let's, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and move this out of the frame here and connect it to the ATEM switcher. So I'm going to plug in both channels 1 and 2. Let me make sure that that is muted on the ATEM so that we're not crackling in anyone's ears here. Okay, Now we've got level there. I'm going to go and I'm going to mute this one right here. So I just press that button right there to mute. All right, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the transmitter so you can hear that. This is the lavalier. It's this transmitter right here. All right, now you're hearing me on the Sanken COS11D. The levels may be just a little different, but that's what you're hearing here. So again, we're transmitting here. You can see we've got levels there. We have a variety of different indicators here. So when I mute, I'm going to go ahead and see if this makes a clicking noise when I mute. And then I'm back on after I've turned the mute off. Don't know did you hear any clicking when that happened? Okay, good. So you have the meter at the top end of the meter. There's a little clip indicator. Right now it's saying that we're bringing in a mic level signal. You can bring in a line level signal on this as well. So if, for example, you had something that was feeding line level, you could transmit it using this as well. And then, of course, it has the frequency with the block and the channel information there. Battery indicator there to show where we're at in terms of battery life. And let's pop that open again. So that's the lavalier microphone with the Sanken COS11D transmitting on the Sony UTX-B40 transmitter. The TX, of course, stands for transmitter, B stands for body pack. And that's what we've got there. So I'm going to go ahead and mute this one, and then we'll bring this one in instead, the plug-on transmitter. All right, why don't we go ahead and switch to the main camera here. So I've got the, this is awkward, but I'm holding my boom microphone now. And this is, again, this is the Sennheiser MKH 50 with the plug-on transmitter, part of the UWP-D system. And this is what this sounds like with the Sennheiser MKH 50 pencil condenser microphone. So just to give you a sense of what that sounds like, everything sounding okay, Danny? Yep, okay. All right, and that is what that sounds like. Now, if I do both of them, you will, of course, probably get some phasing because they're slightly different distances from me. So there's probably a little bit of phasing, especially if I change the distance of this microphone relative to the lavalier microphone. There's definitely going to be some phasing there. So mute the lavalier microphone again on that body pack, and now we're back on the Sennheiser MKH 50. That's coming through the ATEM Mini Extreme ISO. So not the most amazing preamps in the world, but there we go. Okay, I'll go ahead and mute that and go back to my regular mic. Yeah, there we go. Okay, back on the regular mic. Let's take a look at the chat and see what we have going on in the chat. If anyone has questions or comments or input. Hoping to soon see a comparison between the Sony wireless system and the new Deity Theos system. This is probably the most common question. Yes, I'm with you. I do too. I am planning to do that. I'm not going to have both of them at the same time. I do have to send the Sony back in the next couple of weeks, so I won't be able to have them at the same time because the Theos is not shipping yet, or at least I have not received my copy yet. I placed my pre-order probably a month and a half ago or a month ago. In any case, we will talk about my experience with them, and in my review of the Sony, of course, we'll have some raw samples there without any sort of processing, so you can always bring the two videos up in separate tabs in your browser and play them back to evaluate the differences in sound quality. Yeah, so I ordered one. I'm not taking a unit sent by the company for free to me. I bought it with my own money so that I could get a production copy of it, because I'm finding in some cases when I get early copies, they're not always the same as what the production copies are. So I want to get that instead so I can better represent what somebody would buy if they decide to buy that product. All right, Christopher, are the body packs the same? The Sony logo and QR codes are in different positions on the two body packs. Yeah, let's go back to the overhead. They are both UTX-B40s. Yeah, you're right. The QR codes are in different spots. Sharp eye there, Christopher. They're the same model. Everything else seems to be the same about them. When I did the audio test, they sounded the same. So yeah, they are both UTX-B40 models. For whatever reason, the QR codes are in different spots. That's actually a sticker. You know what this actually might be? Yeah, go ahead and go back to the overhead. These actually are probably from the rental company. So Sony works with Lens Rental, and I think the QR codes are from Lens Rental, not a Sony thing, is my guess. In fact,
it's on the side.
Yeah, it's on the side here in this case, so I think that's a Lens Rental thing and not a Sony thing. Good eyes. Matt, company naming convention are insane, literally. I think they have a meaning. I mean, I found this generally engineering-led companies of any sort tend to do this. They come up with a naming scheme that's letters that represent different things. Sennheiser does this, Sony does it, Panasonic does it. Lots of other companies do it. So it's usually the engineering-led companies that have kind of, yeah, I would just call it that. The engineering-led companies tend to do that. When you go to something like a Deity, they're a little bit more consumer-focused, and so they name their products like Theos or Connect, or their microphones still have numbers and letters too, but in any case, that's my general observation. Shoji Productions enjoyed your shotgun versus pencil condenser boom microphone video. Can you comment on the sound of the Sennheiser 8050 versus the 50? My sense is that the 50 has a slightly more focused polar pattern. It's a little less forgiving, if you will, whereas the 8050 tends to be, in my experience, a little bit more forgiving. That's you also don't have the high pass filter and the pad on the 8050 unless you buy an extra add-on unit. Those are the main differences in my mind. The 8050 is way smaller, way lighter. So those are the main differences I've noticed there, Shoji. Hello, what level do you use for the output of the receiver in these systems to connect it to your recorder, mic or line level? Ideally, line level. And in this case, we have, just to double check, you can go out either microphone or line level. I'll have to do some more testing to confirm that, but my understanding is you can go out either line or mic level, and whenever I have a choice, I'd go line level when I can. Now, if you're using a consumer camera that doesn't have a line level input, you definitely want to go out mic level. But when you can, I would generally go line level when I can. So thanks for the question. The SMAD-P5 is what makes this kit very special. I completely agree. We'll have that in the review as well. So they were kind enough to send us FX30, one of their smallest cinema camera. And what the SMAD-P5 is the shoe adapter, so I can put the receiver in the shoe of the camera, and I don't have to connect any cables. And the reason why I think, Matt, you're saying this is special is that way the audio stays digital from the transmitter all the way through to the camera. So you're not converting it back and forth between analog and digital, which is probably better for the audio in 9 out of 10 cases or more. So that's what makes this system pretty nice. So for Sony camera users, pretty good option that way. All right, SportFlow, how is the noise floor? Any audible hiss? Well, we can go back to the microphones and see, and this will be the entire signal chain, so let's do that. I'm going to go ahead and mute this microphone here, and we'll go back over. Why don't we go to the plug-on transmitter? Okay, we're now on the MKH 50 right here. This is using the plug-on transmitter, which is transmitting to the receiver, and the receiver is running out into the ATEM Mini Extreme ISO. So we do have hiss in it. We have noise in our room. There are fans here. The ATEM has a fan in it. This door behind me is actually open just a little bit because it's a little warmer, and there are several fans out there. I don't know if any of the fans and the lights are on at the moment, but I'm definitely hearing the fan from the ATEM. So there's a little very quick sample. We'll do a more in-depth take a look at that with a practical noise floor sample in the final review. Okay. All right, we're back on this microphone here. We'll go ahead and mute that transmitter. Good question. Christopher, any info on compatibility of the slot receiver unit with SoundDevices SL2? I'd have to look that up. Let's go take a look right now. Whoops, not Sound on Sound. Although not a bad online magazine, really quite like it. SoundDevices.com. Let's go look here. We're going to go look at our current products. We have the SL2. Okay, we're going to go ahead and allow the selection. Okay, they're saying audio limited A10, Electro SRB, SRC, SRC 941, SRB 5P, Sony DWR SO3D. So there is a Sony slot receiver that's supported officially. And when we go back to this one, yeah, it is this one that they showed here, the URX SO3D. So yes, that is compatible with the SoundDevices SL2 slot system. When using two transmitters with a dual receiver, we lose the diversity, don't we? We lose the true diversity, so what we have instead is antenna diversity at that point. So either of the receivers, either channel can use either antenna, but they each only can use one receiver circuit. So yes, in short. Robert has a question from last week. If you are recording both 32 and 24-bit audio, do you need to properly set gain for the 24-bit copy? Short answer, yes. I have the habit of setting 24-bit only and setting gain, then setting 32 24-bit mode. If you're talking about specifically the F6, you'll want to look and see if it resets anything, if it changes the trim level once you switch it to 32 and 24-bit mode, where it's recording both. But yeah, you definitely have to set gain for the 24-bit recording. The latency on these Sonys is very good compared to other manufacturers in the same range, even much better than the new Deity Theos, which is 6.3 milliseconds. What do you think of 6.3? It's latency you. If you're using both a wired mic and the wireless system, you will probably have some phasing. So you'll need to correct that in post. You can potentially use your phase invert feature on whatever recorder you're using. So it's a real problem. I mean, it's a reality. I don't think it's horrible. I think it's totally usable. But it is definitely more latency than the Sony system here and most of the professional digital systems. So I believe the SoundDevices is, I believe, sub 1 or 2 milliseconds, something in that range. So that when you get down to that range, it basically becomes a non-issue. Yanti, why does Sony reverse polarity compared to the industry standard Sennheiser 3.5 millimeter? If you want to upgrade from Sennheiser G3, G4, then you need to get a new adapter to fix your lav. I don't know the answer to that. You're right. It's a good point. That Sony wires things differently than everybody else in the industry for their 3.5 millimeter connectors. I don't know why. I have to imagine at some point they made that decision and then they're sticking with it so that there's compatibility between their products when you upgrade. Incidentally, while we're on that topic, so yeah, I don't know. So you have to use a version, for example, of the Sanken COS 11D, which we're using here today, right there on my shirt. It has to be wired specifically for Sony systems, not Sennheiser. I don't know if they thought it was superior in some fashion, or if it was just a decision they made a long time ago before there were other standards, and now they're just sticking with it to maintain compatibility. On that note, detour, thank you, Yanti. I don't know the answer to that. But in terms of compatibility, that's one thing Sony does do well. They have different companding modes here. So if you do have some older Sony analog wireless equipment, these can be compatible depending on which one you have. You just have to switch the mode of the receiver to match the transmitter that you're using, for example. So it can also still handle the analog transmitters in the earlier Sony wireless products, which is nice if you're upgrading and you want to be able to use your older equipment with the newer versions as well. So it's a trade-off. definitely a trade-off. Companding means it's not a true digital system, which is kind of disappointing in 2023. It may be that we're tripping over words here, Christopher. My understanding is that this can be fully digital. I believe it's converting it to digital and in the transmitter and actually sending a digital signal and not an analog signal. I could be wrong on that, but if I understood the documentation that I read correctly, it is. But it can also be switched to a companding mode where it is analog. So I believe it can do both. Mark, with the Sony SMAD adapter connected to supported Sony cameras, the receiver can be powered through the camera connector. That's another reason. That's a great point, Mark, which makes it even nicer, is that the camera can power the receiver as well. Now with like the FX30, you're probably going to want a bigger battery because the little tiny inbuilt battery is really small. But yeah, if you've got it hooked up to a Cine battery or something like that, then that sure makes it convenient because you can power everything with a single big cinema battery. MKH 50 sounds really good. Yeah, I was pleased with the samples I've heard so far. Sounds really, really nice. Good bit of noise introduced with this system. At least it sounds that way on my tablet. B, I would reserve judgment on that. Again, we're going through the A10 Mini right now, which is notoriously suboptimal, I'll say. So wait for the final review to make a judgment on that, where we're actually recording into a proper audio recorder. Just joined. Does this kit have the digital hot shoe mount? It is an option that you can add. My particular kit, I'm waiting for that to arrive as I do the review so that I can run the audio directly into the Sony FX30 in my case. But yeah, it does have that option. Sounded good? Yeah, I think especially the boom mic with the plug-on transmitter sounded good. Will this receiver be able to power via LEMO or only batteries? There's no LEMO connectors on any of these. There are USB-C inputs, so you can power via USB-C on either the transmitter, the receiver, I believe the receiver as well. Can you? Maybe not on the on the receiver as well, and on the. Don't believe that you can you? Yes, you can on the plug-on transmitter as well. So yeah, you can power all of them via USB-C, but no LEMO connectors. What firmware updates are out and what do they do? I haven't gotten that deeply into it yet, so I don't know the answer to that, Paul. More on that in the review. I do not understand why people still like G3, G4 when Sony way better. I've tested and they sound better and way much better when used with the ECM 8890. Albert, I think there's probably a historical reason for that. I think it's there's a lot of word of mouth in the industry and people say I'm happy with my G3 and so someone else says, okay, that's good enough for me. I'm going to go buy that. That could be it. I don't know. Also, some people are very frustrated by some of the decisions Sony makes. We're talking about the 3.5 millimeter input being Sony proprietary. So if you don't want to use their microphones, you want to use something else, it can be a little frustrating. You have to actually send it in and have either you have to DIY it and look up the spec and get all of that done right, which is no big deal if you're into that anyway. But if you're not, then you have to send it into a service center, something like a True Audio or a Gotham Sound, and have them do it for you at a fee. So I think some people are frustrated with that. Oh, also, I mention the antennas are not removable on this system. So just like with the EWDP system and the G4 system, you cannot connect your receiver, for example, to shark fin antennae, the log periodic dipole array antennas that you would often put on a sound cart, for example. Cannot do that. You also cannot replace, it doesn't look like they're user replaceable either. So that's a little bit of a downside. Relative to the Deity Theos, evidently will have SMA connectors, so you can swap out the antennas or connect those bigger antennas on your sound card, which is cool. Jump and hiss when you switch to the plug-on is really noticeable. Yeah, again, reserve judgment on that. Again, we're coming into the inputs on the 3.5 millimeter input on the A10 Mini Extreme ISO, which is, they're not great. Be curious how the plug-on does with your 150 ohm dummy load. Yeah, we'll test that out, see how it goes. Would you ask Sony why they did not send the Sony lav mic included with the kit? I can, yeah. I can do that. Alonzo, one more thing about the SMAD-P5. When used with certain cameras, it allows you to have 4-channel audio, digital plus XLR or digital plus mini jack. One is the A7S3 or the FX3, 6, 9, and 30. Very good. Good to know. So I have the FX30 here, so I should be able to get 4-channel audio. Pretty cool. It would be good to see an accessory that would allow you to enter with the digital shoe, but to enter the recorders, and thus have this option also for recorders with digital inputs. So that would be via XLR cable most likely, because most of the recorders that support the digital input formats usually do that via XLR. But yeah, that'd be cool. That would be cool. I would say this, just to kind of level set everyone. While Sony calls this Sony Pro, I think this system is largely intended for more prosumers and news situations, maybe. I don't think this is necessarily something you're likely to see on a film or a television set, other than news. So just FYI, I think that's the market they're going for, to put it in context. Mark, the DWX SO3D is compatible with the SL2, but not the URX SO3D that you're talking about here. Oh, okay, thank you for the clarification, Mark. There's not a super slot option for the URX SO3D to make it compatible with SL2. Thank you so much for catching that, Mark. And thanks for correcting us. Some may have missed it's important to remember that the UWP-D system is not a true digital system, as the audio is converted to digital, but it is using analog transmission. Okay, there may be some nuances here that I don't understand yet then, Mark. Good to know. Thank you for sharing that. I'll look into it some more.
But then we have a variety of comments.
You're correct. This is digital and works with old analog compander of old Sony systems. Keep going.
That's all.
That's all. Okay. Yeah, I'll look more into that to understand if it's doing its modulating in digital or not. Matt says, if I weren't retired, I would probably get this set because of the SMAD-P5 plugs onto my FX Sony cameras, but I'm staying retired for now, so money saved. There you go. Speaking of plug-on transmitters, is there any cheaper than the UWP or G4 that you would recommend that sends phantom power? Is the Theos system supposed to have a plug-on transmitter? I don't know that I'd recommend it. I haven't tried it yet, but I don't know if the Theos... I would imagine that the Theos system, if they don't do it at launch, that they have a plug-on recorder, I think they announced. I don't know if they have announced a plug-on transmitter yet. Any that are less than the Sennheiser or the Sony systems? Not that I know of. No. I don't know. If anyone does, that's in the... If you want to drop that in the chat, that would be fantastic. Hi. Sony UWP is the optimal level in Sony Pro segment because they had the DWT DWX series and also the last DWT B03 model for cinema or media segment, which comes with Hiroshi mount. Okay, good. Sounds like somebody knows a little bit more history of the Sony wireless system than I do. These are just brand new for me. Mark says, I demoed these at a Sony booth this month, and they said its target is ENG and solo operators. That's absolutely the impression I got from all of their marketing materials. So ENG is electronic news gathering. Solo operators, of course, content creators that are generally operating on their own or very small crews. Thoughts on the 90 block with this system? I would have preferred something wider. I think nowadays we're starting to see most of the systems, certainly on the professional end, and now Theos coming out with a much wider band. It'd be nice to see that. That's such a pain. Just gives you so much more freedom. And even there's still some limitations on some of those as well. Like I think at least when the Nexus from SoundDevices first came out, you were still limited to a block. You could move blocks, but once you got everything set up, you were constrained to a block, I believe. I don't know if that's changed. I haven't looked at the Nexus system in detail, but yeah, wideband would be so much nicer. A wider ultra or an ultra wideband where you don't have to worry about buying specific units for a particular block. Especially if you travel a lot. That's got to be a pain. Okay. That everything in the chat? More or less. We don't have any questions that were submitted ahead of time. So if you've got more questions about the Sony system or anything else sound related, again, you can see there's some people that know more about the Sony system by far in the chat. Between all of us here, hopefully we can get answers to your questions. But yeah, if you've got anything else. Digital is always sent as an analog signal at layer 1 of the OSI protocol stack, but at higher layers, digital is sent as digital, zeros and ones, including wireless transmitters. Yeah, I think when you're doing wireless, there's always some element of analog transmission there, because you're working with waves in the air. Christopher looks like it confirms Nexus is still a small block within the larger total spectrum supported, so all transmitters have to fit into 22 megahertz. Okay, I don't know if there's a technical reason why they do that, but that's interesting. I asked Andrew at IBC Amsterdam, and from what he said, I'm pretty sure a plug-on transmitter for Theos will be released soon. That would be nice. Assuming it all works really well. So Nexus in many major cities is effectively only has a single 6 megahertz channel free. Yeah, depends on where you're working, and they're using very, very narrow slices for each transmission or each channel. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that works out especially for the TV and film world, where they're running 18 channels. What's that?
What's next?
Danny asks, what's Nexus? So we're going to answer Danny's question first. Nexus is the SoundDevices wireless receiver that essentially makes it so you don't have to have a whole bunch of different receivers that fit into slots. Instead, you just have a single unit. The Nexus Go can support 4, 6, or 8 channels. The Nexus can support 8, 12, or 16 channels of wireless audio.
Okay.
So, and they're much smaller. They're much more compact. So
it's like a revolution.
It's kind of a next step in compact. And whereas I have the SL2 here, which can support, I believe, is it 8 channels total if you have 4 channel receivers? I think that's right. Mine is configured right now to receive 4 channels of audio.
So it makes it half the size.
Yeah. Makes it much more compact.
And you get pretty purple buttons.
And you get purple, well, that's purple meters, but yeah. Danny likes the purple meters. Mark, curious to hear about if Sony has fixed the battery draining issue when the receiver is powered down. I have to remove the batteries from my previous gen, UWP. Very annoying. Yeah, good question. I don't know. I just noticed my iPad, speaking of battery drain, I have an iPad Pro, the first generation where they put the XDR display in it. So from 2021, I think it was, or late 2020, whenever that came out. Charged it up to 100% last night for the live stream. Came back this morning, turned off Wi-Fi overnight on the iPad. Came back, it was at 50%. And I don't know if there's something wrong. I did leave it connected to the adapter, so maybe the HDMI adapter, so maybe that's what drained it. But yeah, battery drain is it's a pain, and it is with wireless systems too. It shouldn't do that. It shouldn't drain your batteries when it's powered off. All right, Mark. So did I understand a Sennheiser wired mic would not work directly on the Sony without a rewire? That's correct. Yeah, Sony uses a different pinout scheme on their wireless transmitters and on their receiver, where they can also take a mic input. So you have to use a mic that is specifically wired for Sony 3.5 millimeter. I had a question I sent in pretty late, but how would you arrange receivers in a sound bag? I have a bag with 2 G4 receivers in it, but on some shoots I've had to add a couple, and it's been a struggle. Ooh, yeah, that for the receivers that are not really made for bag, like the G4s, I've seen a lot of people that do that, configure them in different ways. So some of the sound bags have little things that you can put the body pack, the body clip. Let me show you this. This is the receiver. See how there's a clip, like a belt clip? So what I've seen some people do is, what's that?
I was going to say point to the clip, because
Yeah.
it's the same color.
Clip is right here. So that's a belt clip. What they do is they put a piece of, like a hard piece of, some of the bags have this as well, like the Orca bags have things like this where you can actually kind of configure it so it's sitting up a little bit more out of the bag, and then they kind of use the belt clip to clamp them on there. And that way you can see the screen and change the settings if you need to do that. So that's what I've seen some people do. Yeah, but I'm using the slot system on mine, so the screen is facing up out of the bag from the top of the slot. But that's what I've seen other people do. Okay, thanks for the stream, man. Can't wait for your review of the Sony system. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for coming by today to check it out. And man, is the Nexus gear 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, is it $7 signs expensive? It is very expensive, yeah. It is expensive, but it's also, if you're actually running that many channels, a couple of things. Number one, if you're doing that all the time, then it's actually cheaper than buying a bunch of independent receivers, or for cases where you only do that every once in a while, then you would rent it. In which case, again, it would be more cost effective that way. So yeah, it's not cheap. It's not the type of thing that most people just buy and add to their kit.
We have more of Faturi's. We're having pieces of it coming in.
Oh, Orca bag, by the way, specifically the Orca 280. For some reason, the Orca bag uses a band that is split in the middle, which is not ideal, but works for clipping on using the belt clip. I'm not sure what the split in the middle, I'm not familiar with the 280, so I haven't used that one. I've got the OR34, I think it is, which is a bigger one. That's what I have my SoundDevices 888 in. And then I think I have the OR30, which is the smaller one that I use for mixed pre's. But I don't know of any of a split. They're two different bands. So when I had my 633 and the OR30, I was able to put both of the receivers in there, and it had sort of these elastic bands on the back of the divider halfway through the bag. So I would usually put them in that, but I don't know if that's what you're referring to as a split. Christopher, Nexus works differently than traditional receivers. It has one radio that digitizes the 22 megahertz, and then DSP pulls the individual channels out. It's how they get the channel density. So it has one radio that takes that block, that 22 megahertz block, and then uses digital signal processing to extract the individual channels. Interesting. Okay. I wonder if that's true. Is that true both on the Nexus and the Nexus Go? I would think the Nexus Go is, if you're doing 16 channels in a 22 megahertz block, that's interesting. Okay, cool. Thanks for that, Christopher. It seems to me that whenever a wireless system is used, the noise floor is noticeable. AVX. Sony is a little better, but definitively noticeable. Not used high-end Electro Wizzy to compare, though. Keep in mind that a lot of times it's the microphones. The wireless system certainly can be part of it, but if I go to the Sanken microphones, give me just a moment to pull that up. Okay, let's go ahead and share that, Danny. Let's go to the COS11D, and let's look at the specifications. Its self-noise is 28 dBA weighted. That's not terribly unusual for a lavalier microphone. So that's the first thing in the signal chain you need to keep in mind, is that a lot of these lavalier microphones in and of themselves are quite noisy. So that's the first thing. And then after that, there's also the whole challenge of wireless transmission, which also potentially adds more to the self-noise of the system. So yeah, there are a lot of factors. If wireless is it's a trade-off. You don't have to have wires, but there are other trade-offs. So so it's always challenging. I have found that the SoundDevices system is quite clean. I haven't really worried about that. So for example, with a wired boom on a SoundDevices A10 transmitter, for all practical purposes at that point, the noise floor of the room, the actual room tone, sits above the noise floor that's creating, depending on which microphone I use. So you have to go into the higher end systems. But again, this is more, I would call this sort of prosumer kind of a system. So there's still going to be some noise, most likely. Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. So it's just hard to fit more than one receiver per band. Yeah. 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 You could, instead of using the bands, that's where you have to I'd probably go away from using the bands. If you want to fit more, it would be a challenge. I don't know if the 280 comes with it, but the 30 came with 2 dividers. So you could actually, I don't know, you could probably buy some aftermarket as well to Velcro those in and have a little bit more space. Although density wise, you probably need to spread those out as much as you can in the bag. Thanks. Thanks, Vichiri, for the question. All right, Mark, you commonly see Sony UWP and Sennheiser G3, G4 on smaller film and commercial sets used as camera hops, but yes, typically not the actual production audio. It's been my experience. I have not worked on any film or TV. I've worked on commercial sets and smaller productions. Do you think it's worth selling my Rode NTG4 Plus and switching to a Sennheiser MKH 600? Well, I've used both of those microphones. I prefer the sound of the MKH 600. I don't know if you don't use the inbuilt battery on the NTG4 Plus, so that's not a big deal. Well, actually, the MKH 600 does that too. Yeah, I actually quite prefer the Sennheiser. I don't know how much of a difference you'll notice in sound. There'll be a little bit different. NTG4 always sounded, 4 and the 4 Plus always sounded a little thin to me. I think you'll get a little bit more bass with the MKH 600, closer to reality. So, yeah, if you've got the option, that's probably what I would do, is switch over to the Sennheiser. Matt, I had a rule that when possible, don't use wireless because wireless enter all kinds of possible issues. I learned that from the IT world. I could not agree more. When you don't have to use wireless, don't. When you do, you do. But when you don't have to use it, I wouldn't use it. So, and I know, Matt, you've also talked about using the Tentacle Track E, the little body pack recorders. I see that versus wireless as a trade-off, and I definitely see the value of something like a body pack recorder because you just subvert all of the, you don't have to deal with any of the wireless issues. They're just generally, although the control app is wireless, but that's generally not as much of an issue. But the advantage, of course, of wireless is that you can monitor it in real time. You can kind of do that with the Track E. You can at least monitor one channel at a time. But other than that, most of the other body pack recorders you can't monitor. And so it's a little bit of a challenge. So I just see that as a trade-off, and you just have to make a decision about what is most important. But yeah, I agree with you. If you don't have to do wireless, don't do wireless. Mark says, UWP-D, also good to use as an IFB since the receiver has a headphone out. Great little system for a variety of uses. Yeah, I could see that. The headphone out, so you've got the, would you use the, yeah. Although, maybe one of the other receivers, like a single channel receiver, would make more sense as an IFB receiver. This one's a little chunky. It could work. It's not terribly heavy. I think most of the weight is probably in the batteries, to be honest, but this particular one is a little chunky. I think they have a single channel receiver as well, which might be a better choice for IFB. Linus Media Group, they use both a wireless and a trackie as a backup in case the wireless has dropouts. Backup's a good idea. Usually on set, when I would do the corporate video work that I was doing prior to my current job where we're working in the studio, I would use a wireless lav and a wired boom mic pretty much every time. In those circumstances, I didn't really encounter many wireless dropout issues, but we always had that backup, that option in post. All right. Mark, yes, single channel for IFB. All right, what's that? Danny asks a question, what is IFB? IFB is interruptible foldback. That's technically what it means. Traditionally, it was used as an earpiece for a news caster. So someone, a news anchor, for example, they'd have an earpiece in there, and that way a producer could whisper to them and give them updated information. On film sets, typically what it's used for is to feed at least some mix of the production audio to a director, to a script supervisor, to a producer, or anyone else on set. So we still refer to them as IFBs. All right, we have just a couple more minutes here. If you've got any more questions, if you could just tag at CurtisJet we'll take a look at those. And Alonzo, there is a specific IFB mode that allows you to use plus and minus buttons to directly control headphone volume. It's been implemented with the latest update. Oh, cool. That's pretty neat. That makes it easy.
With that particular thing?
Yeah, it sounds like with the UWP system. That's cool. That's a nice little add-on to get double duty out of your system. So here's another question. I have a question that speaks in your latest video. Is there a way to make shotgun microphones sound like pencil condenser sounds? I mean, with post-production. Well, I don't think that they just use different operating principles to create their polar pattern and to reject off-axis sound. So they're just using it. They're just going about it different ways. I wouldn't. The whole question about that I got a lot, and I've heard this advice over and over again, is don't use shotgun microphones indoors. And the reasoning for that is that the way that the interference tube design works is that if the same sound source is coming into the front of the mic and also bouncing off the walls and coming into the side of the mic, it creates some constructive interference or destructive interference. So it can color the mic, and it'll be out of phase depending on how far away the wall is and when the reflected sound gets into the interference tube. So it will color in different ways. A short answer, Anil, no. At a practical level, however, for a lot of people, certainly on YouTube, and that's, remember, this is a YouTube video we're talking about here, 90-some% of the people watching that probably couldn't even hear a difference between the shotgun microphones and the pencil condenser mics. And in fact, even in my case, I didn't find most of the shotgun microphones to be so offensively colored that they were unusable. So for people that are making YouTube videos, it probably doesn't matter at all. just buy a good quality microphone and get to work making content, making recordings. But for those that are very particular, that are doing it professionally, in those cases, I think it makes sense to use a supercardioid non-shotgun microphone as a boom mic indoors generally. So that's my perspective on it. I don't think there's a post. You could do all sorts of fancy phase adjustment things, especially if you're trying to to phase align it with a lavalier microphone. So, and we talked about, there was Vocaline is one of the one of the plugins out there that allows you to do that, and it will actually dynamically adjust it, as I recall. So I guess that's your answer, Anil, is that you can use a phase alignment tool in post if you're going to try and match it up with a lavalier or another microphone, like maybe a plant mic. All right. Matt, time for another date night for Danny and Curtis. Wow, Matt, thank you so much. Danny Danny gives her thumbs up too. Definitely will do. Thanks so much, Matt. Very kind of you. All right. Is the Aston Spirit mic on your review radar?
That was a car at first.
Danny thought it was a car. It's actually a microphone. I do not currently have that on my review radar, but thank you for the suggestion. I believe Bandrew has reviewed that one. I'm trying to remember which one that is. Aston Spirit.
Doesn't that sound like a car to you?
It definitely sounds like a car to me. So it's a multi-pattern microphone, fairly budget-oriented. Let's pop over to their site here. With quite a look. Has a sort of interesting grill there. Of course, they have endorsements from various record producers and such, with some big names on there. Yeah, didn't necessarily have my eyes on it, but we could certainly take a look at it if budget and time allow. I don't do reviews of a ton of large diaphragm condenser mics. I assume this is a large diaphragm condenser. Yeah, 1-inch gold capsule.
Oh, do you want it still?
No, that's okay. Fine. So I trust Bandrew to do most of those reviews. So, and he also throws in a little pop punk test at the end too. So you get plenty of spoken word audio, plus a little pop punk surprise. Thanks for explaining why not to use shotgun mics indoors in your new shotgun versus pencil condenser microphone boom microphones video. You got it. I also, by the way, just to underscore, my opinion is that microphone police are not going to show up and arrest you if you're using a shotgun microphone indoors. And there are actually plenty of news situations I've heard of using the CMIT 5U indoors. In fact, I worked on a commercial piece where we used it. Well, I wasn't the sound mixer on this one. I was a production assistant, but we used the CMIT 5U indoors. I just think there are times when it might make better. If you're working in it professionally and you already have a pencil condenser microphone, or you're going to be doing it professionally regularly, then it probably makes sense to do that. So, but you won't get arrested by the microphone police. Pretty sure. Consult your lawyer.
Okay.
All right.
We're gonna recap this, and then there's one more after.
Okay. You might be under embargo, but did Deity send you the Theos system? No, they have not sent me the Theos system. I pre-ordered it. So I'm buying it just like anyone else that would buy it will be buying it. There's a person who already uploaded a review of the system, but it's not in English. I wonder how they got it. That's interesting. Yeah, I'm not going to get an early copy. I'm going to get a copy probably in the first production run, like anyone else who buys the first round. So, I explain, just in case anyone missed the reasoning for that. The reason for that is that I want to make sure that I have something that's equivalent to what people will buy, so that the review is more meaningful that way. But what I have found is that sometimes when you get early copies, pre-production, they end up changing some things. So I would rather just get a production copy of it. Godix is making all kinds of new products lately. I'm wondering, will you make a review of them? I would like to see your take on these products. Lighting, yes. I reviewed one of their shotgun microphones and I was not impressed. If they make some more, I'm happy to take a look at them, but their first one was pretty rough. I don't, it's a little weird for a company that makes lights to also make microphones. I mean, a little weird from the standpoint that they have to really, there's so much nuance to microphone design. I would think that you'd want certainly a separate division that would focus on that has the specialty skills necessary to make that work well. But honestly, that's how Deity started. Deity was part of Aperture. Their first microphone was called the Deity Shotgun Microphone. And they made several lavalier microphones as well. But they were the first Deity microphone, which was later updated and turned into the S-Mic 2, was okay, but pretty noisy. And the first thing that Andrew did when he arrived is that they redesigned it and cleaned it up so that it made less self-noise. And the S-Mic 2 is quite good. The original one was a little bit on the noisy side. So I think that's a similar thing with Godox, is they're going to need to decide, do they really want to get into that business? And if so, it probably makes sense to spin off the company, get some engineers in there that are specifically, highly skilled at microphone design, and approach it that way. Okay. All right, I think that's it for this week, everybody. Thank you so much for coming by. And in the meantime, get out there, make some great sound. We'll talk to you again next week. Take care, everybody.